Hello, you're watching The Great Canadian Bagel, and today I have a follow-up video to my last Canada video. We're going to be discussing Canadian political factions. So this is going to conclude the NDP, the Conservatives, and the Liberals in a slightly more fidelity than I did last time. Part of the reason I'm doing this is a bunch of people in the comments were asking for it. People were having lots of discussions about it. But specifically, there was a lot of people who were confused or didn't like or accept my argument for the NDP is the biggest threat to the Conservatives, so I'm doing this partially to better argue my point with some more figures and I think perhaps a little easier way to show this to people, because this isn't really an opinion. This is based on data analysis I've done, but by all means, feel free to comment in the comment section below if you don't agree or to understand the point I'm making. I can happily clarify, or we can have a discussion. Sometimes I'm wrong, of course. I'm only a person. But with that, no further ado, I will just shout out my channel members. I really appreciate the support you guys give the channel. And if you want to support the work I do here, by all means, go and link in the description below and press that join button. Or otherwise, do your regular YouTube things, like, share, subscribe, and comment below. But let us begin. So, let's start off the main point. So, in my last video, I said the NDP was the main threat to the Conservatives right now, in practice, because of this trend. Now, this trend has been created, and it has an R-squared of 0.386, so a relatively strong correlation. It's obviously not the strongest correlation in the world, but 0.386, the square root of 0.386, let's see. And I didn't prep this because, of course, I didn't. That's a correlation of like 0.62, so it's reasonably large correlation. It does explain a reasonable amount of the variation in the Conservative Party vote share, what the NDP's vote share is. And you'll notice it has this parabolic trajectory. Now, these data points that I am using here are all federal elections since 2003, all Ontario provincial elections since 2003, all Nova Scotian provincial elections since 2003, except 2024, because it's an outlier for the PCs. It's the best they've done in the time period. And 2009, because it's an outlier for the NDP. It's the best NDP provincial election in the entire data set. All the Newfoundland elections since 2003, except 2011 and 2007, because they're outliers. 2007 for the PCs, 2011 for the NDP, once again. I'm not including, so I'm also doing New Brunswick 2003 to 2014. I'm not doing the last three because the People's Alliance is sufficiently strong that the right vote is split and the noise to signal is not correct here. I'm really trying to go for elections where it's the NDP, the Liberals, and a right-wing party, where the Liberals are the stronger of the two. So basically, the Liberals and the PCs or the Conservatives are the two main parties with an NDP third. I'm looking at those specific elections because that's pretty much what federal Canada is. And finally, we have PEI from 2003 to 11. I'm not including 15, 19, or 23 because the Greens are too strong, and it makes the data fuzzy because the NDP is no longer the third choice party, it's the fourth choice party. If you disagree with those things, with those points, feel free, though I would very strongly say that you can't include PEI or New Brunswick, the last three elections in either province. You could probably quibble on the Newfoundland and Nova Scotia exclusions, but they are pretty big outliers, so the elections I've excluded. So I think it is worth excluding it, but I just want to be clear on which data we're including. And I'm not including any provinces in Western Canada because they do not have any provincial elections in the last 20 years since the Conservative Party formed itself federally, where the Liberals came in first or second with the NDP in third. They do not exist in any of those provinces, so it's going to generate different data. it's not going to work the same way because the forces that happen when it's an NDP versus Conservative election are very different than when it's NDP versus Liberal with an NDP third. These are very different beasts that cannot be considered together. But with that, we do get this trend, and this is a very strong, fairly strong correlation here. What we see here is if the NDP is below 10 points, this correlates with a much stronger vote share for the Conservatives. In fact, which is where we are right now. We're around 6, and this corresponds with quite a high vote share for the Conservatives. But as you get above 10, the Conservative vote share declines until you get around 20. At somewhere around 20 to 25 is flat, where it doesn't really matter what the NDP does. And then the graph, the data implies that it should, after 25, start swinging upwards, though we don't have a lot of data points on this end, so this is more speculative, but this is what we would expect to a degree, though with the caveat being, if the NDP is reliably pulling over here, you start looking at the provincial elections in Western Canada, which are different than the ones, different type of data. So you probably want to go into a different data set. But the core of the data set I think that matters here is the 0 to 25 range. Maybe you could say 0 to 30, because you could theoretically have the NDP pop up to 30 every now and then, under Jack Layton. But otherwise, that's kind of the gist here. So this is what I mean. The NDP right now at 6 is going to take away from the Conservatives. Is likely going, it gaining ground is likely going to harm the Conservatives much more than it is going to benefit them for their short term. If you want to do the math on what this would work out to be, feel free. I don't. So there's that. But now we're going to discuss the factions. And this is based loosely off of this chart that I've sort of high-resed it, but it's not all fully high-res because the image on the Abacus website is fairly small. This is from Abacus Data. And this is the ideological distribution of Canadians' their survey data. I've also done some of my own surveys in the past, and I've looked at other data. So this is not just this source, but this is one of the core things. And I'm basically categorizing factions roughly corresponding to these different sections. So when you see one of my columns is going to be size of the faction, that's corresponding to what percentage the electorate has views similar to that. Not necessarily, of the population, not necessarily the percentage of the electorate. 12, well, I'll just skip to the next. Oh, did not mean to have it in there. Anyways, so look at just socialists for a second. I don't think it's correct to say 6% of the voters are socialists, because I think a lot of the socialist voters don't vote. But they are a significant faction. I realize here that this is cut off on this end, but just to go down, this is loyalists, blue Labour, orange liberals, green liberals, socialists. Now, to start with loyalists, every chart has loyalists. From what I can tell, the loyalist faction of every party roughly seems to be about 6%. This is very loose. And the loyalist faction doesn't have opinions. They don't care. They are the party. So, in other words, the loyalist NDPers are the core base of the NDP. They are the core of the ideology of the NDP. It doesn't really make sense to distinguish it because they are the NDP. The NDP are the loyalists. The Liberals are the loyalists. The Conservatives are the loyalists to a degree. These other factions are ones who ally with the NDP loyalists. So their positions matter to a degree, but these ones really don't, because this position is just whatever the NDP's position is, if that makes sense. Yes, if you were to take the NDP and turn it into a conservative party, the current loyalists would leave the party. But as long as you move the NDP in a manner that is rational and is not just categorically different, the loyalists will be in the party because they're the loyalists of the party. It's kind of self-basing. And it's roughly 6%. And this number, roughly, you've seen this last election, is pretty much, if they bother to vote, that's the minimum share the NDP could ever get in an election if they bother voting. Sometimes it might be less because there's no candidate, too. The first major faction, as I touched on, is Blue Labor. Now, they are old-school trade unionist types, so they like unions, they like welfare programs, they're skeptical on capitalism. They're not anti-capitalist, but they're not super pro-capitalist. They are protectionist. They do not like foreign trade undermining their businesses. They don't like competition with foreign labor. They're anti-immigration. They don't want foreign labor coming in to do their jobs. They're socially conservative. They don't really want society to change. They just want redistribution, essentially. They're generally decentralist. They don't like big central governments. They are more localized. To a degree, what number of syndicalists exist in Canada? Many of them are subsumed in here. The rest are probably in like the more socialist camp. Now, this is the single biggest section of voters that are winnable to the NDP based off of the core platform of the NDP. Based on who the current loyalists are, this is the biggest faction they can win. And they win this faction based on economics. This particular point. They lose this faction specifically in immigration, but also on social values. Social values really alienates them. Immigration will push them away. And you see this everywhere in the world right now. Immigration is the biggest issue for a lot of people. You get the Orange Liberals. Now, the Orange Liberals are your classic NDP liberal swing voter, though usually they vote Liberal. They're the second largest faction winnable, roughly speaking, to the NDP. And they're capitalists, but they like welfare. They generally are pro-free trade. They're generally pro-immigration. They're generally socially liberal. They like centralizing government. Oh, and on the environment here, tertiary just means when I list something as like tertiary issue, it's generally deemed as relevant but not important. Like, there is environment, things you should do, but it's not core or really important at all on the platform. Secondary would mean they are looking for environment parts in the platform, but it's not going to decide their vote. They're not going to vote for the Liberals or the Greens or the NDP based off of environment policy. But if two parties are the same, the environment might be a decider. And then for Green Liberals, so the Green Liberals, they're capitalists, but they want more regulations. Some Greens are not very pro-welfare. Some are, but many are mediocre on welfare, but are very big in regulations because they want to do the environment. That's their main thing. They want to regulate capitalism for the environment. That's the main thing for the Green Liberals. Otherwise, they're generally very socially liberal, pro-immigration, free trade, all that stuff. And they're about 8%. Now, historically, the Green Liberals have been who the Green Party and the NDP have fought over. But in the last election, they seem to have either stayed home or all voted Liberal, more or less. Because the Greens got like 2% of the vote, and which is these guys. The 2% the Greens got are these guys, for the most part. But they got about 2% of the vote, and then the rest either stayed home or went, roughly speaking, to the Liberals. Then you have the Socialists. Obviously, they believe in socialism. Though you could put syndicalism here because they do exist in Canada, or communists. They're also here. But communists and syndicalists and other variations of left-wing thought, if you like my socialism video, are very small. There's not many of them, so I'm subsuming them into this block. They generally believe in a fair trade, which is a bit poorly defined, but the idea is basically free trade, but considering like they don't want to trade with people who have bad labor regulations or exploit workers and stuff like that. The immigration policy varies. Some socialists can be very pro-immigration, some can be very anti. I don't really know how to describe this group. They are very social. They are socially liberal, though, for the most part. And generally speaking, climate is a second-tier issue because socialism is the first issue. And in orange here, we have, roughly speaking, the universe of the NDP. These are the squares they can win. Roughly speaking, these squares correspond to... these squares correspond to, like, these ones here. The orange liberal types. These ones to the blue labor. And then these ones over here are socialist, green liberals, and the NDP loyalists. They cross this corner, so that's just the general gist here. Then we get to the liberals. I sized this chart better so you can read it. Same deal with the loyalists. They're still about 6% of liberals. Of the electorate. No, of voters, sorry. Their biggest faction is once again Blue Labor, but we're going to start with the Blue Liberals. The Blue Liberals are kind of like your Andrew Coyne types. They want capitalism with less regulations and less welfare. They're like the Paul Martins of the Liberal Party, maybe even the Mark Carneys of the Liberal Party. Now, that doesn't mean they want zero welfare or zero regulation, but they want less. They want to free the market. They're very laissez-faire for the Liberal Party. They are free trade. They're pro-immigration. They're mildly socially liberal. They are firmly on the socially liberal side of things, but they don't really care about social issues in any way, shape, or form. And the environment is a tertiary issue because their main issue is making the economy go burr. They want big economy, for the most part. We have the Orange Liberals again, who are the same as the Orange Liberals that vote for the NDP. They are one of the largest groups here. Green Liberals, same deal. Blue Labor, same deal. Unsurprisingly, these factions overlap between the parties because Blue Labor, if you look at polls like Polera, they didn't all vote NDP or Blue or Conservative or Liberal. They voted like 45% Conservative, 7% NDP, and I think it's like 34% Liberal. I think that's what it broke out to. So Blue Labor was split 3 ways, though the NDP being very, very minor. But the final group that the Liberals can win is the Red Tories. Now, I'm using Red Tory correct here. Many people use Red Tory to mean the Blue Liberals. And many Blue Liberals will call themselves Red Tories for some reason. That is wrong. They're wrong. They are wrong to do so. That is incorrect. They are not Red Tories. Red Toryism is conservatism. It's Toryism, but with welfare. That's why it's red. It's not capitalism, but socially liberal. It's Toryism, but socialist. It's not quite right the way to phrase it, but you get the idea. So they want capitalism with more welfare. They are protectionist. They're soft anti-immigration. They're not the biggest hardcore anti-immigrationists in the whole world. And they are socially conservative. And this is kind of where you get with these different factions. I'll just go back here for a second. Oh, I'm doing this backwards. Oops. Am I going to edit that out? No. We're going to go here for a second. So this is kind of what I was getting at with the NDP earlier in the last video. Blue Labor here. How do I phrase this? So the NDP is united on economics. Everyone here, every faction that will vote NDP is not very pro-capitalism. Some of them might be capitalists, like the orange and green liberals, but they're not like gung-ho, yeah, capitalism, unleash the free market. They all want government intervention in the economy to regulate and provide welfare. That's what unites everyone who could vote NDP. What doesn't unite everyone who votes NDP is trade policy, immigration, social policy. Now, it can seem tempting to say, scoop up the social liberals on social policy. because they're a big section of people who are accessible. It's 25% of the roughly 49% who will vote. No. 25, 44? Doesn't matter. Yeah, 25 of the 44% who might vote NDP are very socially liberal. You could even say the sixes, so it would be 30% are very socially liberal. 31, sorry. But the issue with that is then you alienate the blue labor. And again, some of the orange liberals and the socialists, they are socially liberal. They're not as socially liberal as the green liberals. So it's harder to please everyone. Social issues are much more divisive across the board. This unites them a lot better because the socialists, if they vote, will say, well, this is better than the other guys. They're not going to vote necessarily for social issues. Some might, don't get me wrong, but in the of the 6%, the majority of them are not going to vote for a capitalist party that's socially liberal. They won't do that. They will vote for a party that's pro-regulation, pro-welfare, that's socially liberal. They'd probably even do one that's centrist on social issues. Just fine. And that's kind of the deal here. So this unites NDP prospective voters. This diverges them. This very much diverges them because even socialists can be skeptical on immigration. And to a degree that orange liberals can be, but most orange liberals are pro-immigration. You get a similar-ish story. Sorry, not similar. You have an actually more complicated story with the liberals here. Because they have a huge diversity of thought in their camp. So they have 22% are anti-immigration of their accessible voters, but roughly speaking, 25% are pro-immigration. Same thing with protectionist versus free trade. You have like the blue labor, green liberals, and orange liberals who want more regulations or welfare. And the Tories. Or the blue liberals want less. Now, you could say this is the way to go, but these guys have money and are going to donate to the party more. So that's an issue. You could look at social issues, and you have 19% who are socially liberal, 22% who are conservative. But then you have social liberals, so then it's, again, 25%. So we really get across the board is you get pretty much these three versus these two as the dividing issue in the Liberal Party. And over the last number of years, over the end of the Trudeau regime, we had really these four factions were what was left of the Liberals. And that's where you got numbers saying that they had like accessible vote total of like 31% or so. Maybe some of the blue labor was willing to go for them when the conservatives were not being very anti-immigration. So like 2023, that's how you might be seeing them in like the 40-50% range. Now, Mark Carney does kind of throw a wrench in this because he's not very clearly aligned at all. And he actually the vote for him in 2025 breaks this chart because what unites all the voters who voted Liberal is actually a secret like 6th, 7th thing, which is anti-Americanism. It wasn't immigration, it wasn't social policy, it wasn't economic policy, it wasn't trade policy, it was anti-Americanism that united them, which is why the liberal faction can be quite fragile right now. But that's why in my last video, I don't think the fragileness of the Liberal coalition benefits the NDP because the most leaders of the Liberals are going to want to double down on this 31%, not this 22%. Now you could say this 6% shouldn't count, but then it's 25 versus 22. They're not going to do it. So they will win some blue labor, the people who really care about like economic policy more than immigration or social policy. They exist, obviously. None of these are monoliths, but they do vote similar directions. They might win some of the red Tories who are really concerned about the more welfare part. But overall, that's going to be the big issue. And the blue Labour and red Tories right now are more likely to defect Conservative than they are to defect NDP. But if the NDP really caters things properly and runs for aiming for blue Labour, they could win the defectors from the Liberals back to the NDP and also pressure the Conservatives in that regard. And that's how you get to this chart, because when they win blue Labour, they not only take voters from the Liberals, they take votes from the Conservatives. So that's how you end up getting quite high in this without actually before the Conservatives really start gaining vote share again. But finally, we will going to hit the Conservatives factions. So they have the most factions because the Conservative tent is really broad and it's almost incoherent. They have the highest theoretical ceiling of 62%, but they will never, ever pull 62% because there's people who will just never vote together. You will not get the blue Liberals and the high Tories simultaneously voting for your party. They were both parties who the Conservatives, the loyalist Conservatives right now, could pivot to win either group, but they can't win both. They can't really win blue Labour and the blue Liberals. It's just not possible. Now they can win these four. They can also win these three and maybe some of the red Tory types. But again, that's not really set. I'll give you an example here. Aaron O'Toole won the Loyalists, the Blue Tories, for the most part the Libertarians, for the most part some of the Blue Liberals, and many of the high Tories stayed home. He won some of the red Tories, and he won some of Blue Labour. And that's how you get to like 34%. Obviously many of these people stayed home too, across the board. And the Libertarians were a little split with the PPC. And the Libertarian Party, I guess. But what you see with Poilievre in his last election is he lost the Blue Liberals. He got rid of them. He threw them out of the party, pretty much. But he got more of the Libertarians back, paradoxically. And he doubled down on winning Blue Labour, bringing back the red Tories, and activating high Tories again. Though he didn't fully activate the high Tories, which I think is why he lost. And he failed to do that because he was too weak on immigration and social policy. He was focused much more on economics. And if you look at this chart here, it's very clear. We have three groups who want capitalism with less regulations and welfare. Though you could say the Libertarians should be capitalism with no regulation and no welfare, but I digress. And then you have old school unionism, capitalism with more welfare, and corporatists / neo-mercantilists. I group this together because not everyone in that group is technically like properly high Tories. You could probably have like integralists and corporatist types in this group, but it is what it is. So economics diverges the Conservative Party. You can't even say, focus on these three, because capitalism with more welfare and trade unionism is actually not the same thing. Corporatism is not capitalism with more welfare. Those are different things entirely. So economics divides the Conservative Party. And this is the issue that Shears had. This is the issue Harper had in 2015 to a degree. This is the issue O'Toole had. This is the issue you saw Reform have in the 90s and the Canadian Alliance in the or like 2000. For the most part, economics does not unite the right in Canada. What unites the right in Canada, as long as you are willing to lose the blue Liberals, is social policy, because these four groups are all socially conservative. And the libertarians are centrist on social policy, so as long as your social policy is not too onerous, you're probably going to see these guys, the libertarians, tolerate it and vote for you on capitalist policies. But even if you only get these four groups, what you have is 30, 43, 49%. Now, you're not going to win everyone, because NDP are going to win some of these guys. The Liberals are going to win some of Blue Labour and Red Tories as well. Some of the High Tories are probably going to stay home, no matter what you do. But it is the the largest section of voters can be won by focusing on social policy for the Conservative Party. And it's the opposite for the NDP. The largest swath of voters are winnable by focusing on economics. And for the Liberals, you have to do much more complex actions. And this is why the Liberals in 2008 and 2011 very struggled. Because the Liberal Party, and the way it's structured, since it's in the center and kind of has the ability to appeal to everybody to a degree, it has the ability to do really well in elections and consistently win, which is why it has done that for like everyone who's alive's lifetime since the 30s. But it requires strong leadership to do that, and it requires the ability to throw away a leader very quickly and pivot very quickly. And they have been able to do that, but it's not guaranteed that they will always be able to do that. 2008 and 2011 are good examples of where this falls through. This is also what's happened in Western Canada. That's why there's no Liberal Party in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, or BC. But finally, this is what we have for the voting universe of the Conservatives. It looks really big. It looks like I'm saying, oh, the Conservatives should dominate. But the one thing I really want to remind you, is you can't actually win all these voters. The core of the Conservative Party is like right here. Well, it's probably right here. This is the core of the Conservative Party, like these three squares. Have it more heavily on these two. The blue Tories are like here. The red Tories are here. High Tories are up here. Blue Labour here. Blue Liberals here. Libertarians over here. This is the core. The core can pivot on economics and win everyone here, for the most part. It can do social policy and win everyone here. But it can't do this group and this group at the same time. It can't do both. It has to pick one. And as we see with this data right here on the chart, you only have like 27% of the population is on the right of economic policy, whereas you have 46% who are to the right on social policy. So this unites the Conservatives, this divides them. But with that, I bid you guys adieu, and I will see you next time with something else.